6.
Till we can identify additional revenue that we'll be working with you on in the coming years. So that's just kind of a brief update of where we're at on the staff side in budget balancing, and I'll hand it back over to Susie.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And I will go ahead and launch right into our revenue forecast update. I want to start with some background on our annual forecast process. We start in July every year so that we have 6 months of recent history. Each line item is looked at individually, and with sales tax and B&O tax, a couple of our largest revenue sources, we take it down to the individual industry categories and even look at individual businesses. We incorporate both broad and Everett-specific economic factors based on information we gather through research and webinars, and generally keeping up to date on those issues. Inflation, the Federal Reserve actions to curb inflation, consumer debt, and COVID all headline broad concerns this year. And new businesses opening in Everett or around Everett, business closures, current trends for existing businesses, population growth, and updates to our service fees represent some of the key Everett-specific factors that were taken into consideration. So as we have been reporting in the monthly financial reports, revenues are coming in very strong this year. Based on year-to-date activity, we've revised the original forecast up by $7.7 million, or 5.5%. Sales tax has led the way and is now forecast to finish the year $3.7 million over budget. Construction activity and manufacturing are the largest contributors there. We also see the impact of construction on our permits, plan check fees, and inspection fees, all of which are exceeding the original forecast, and together represent about $1.2 million of the increase in the revised forecast. We also received an extra allocation of GEMT revenue due to COVID provisions, which accounts for a little over $860,000. And we received nearly $1 million in grants that were not approved before the adoption of the original budget of 2022. Looking towards 2023, we're forecasting $1.5 million, or a 1% growth over our 2022 revised forecast. The average growth for the subsequent years in our model is 1.4%. Although as a whole, the forecast is relatively flat, there are a few notable increases and decreases from 2022. On the positive side, we have B&O tax, which is forecast to come in nearly $800,000 over the 2022 revised estimate. A key factor in this change is that we are expecting to have the remaining 787s that were built in Everett delivered towards the end of this year and through next year. So we were able to add those planes back into our forecast. We also have an increase in the water and sewer payment in lieu of tax due to a combination of increased rates and consumption expectations. Our interfund transfers are higher, as we will propose to use the car tab fees that accumulated while the court challenge was ongoing regarding $20 car tabs, instead of a direct general fund contribution to help fund street overlay. Forecast reductions from the new 2022 estimate include line items relating to construction. We meet with our permit team every year, and they do foresee a slight slowing of activity over the next year, which is reflected in the 2023 estimates. However, I would still consider our 2023 construction forecast to be robust overall. This would be consistent with the impact that we're seeing from increasing interest rates by Fed actions. The 2023 GEMT revenue forecast is lower than 2022 due to the special allocation that we received in 2022. And of course, we do not expect to receive that allocation in 23. And we also always see significant volatility in grants year over year. As you know, we don't budget for grants that we don't have signed grant contracts for. And I anticipate we'll bring forward new grants through the amendment process next year, as we usually do. So, you really can't watch TV or read the newspaper without seeing or hearing speculation about whether the nation is in or headed towards a recession. And I've read a lot of arguments, both for and against it lately. And what's particularly challenging right now is there are mixed signals coming from leading indicators. Traditionally, 2 consecutive quarters of decline in GDP signals that the economy may be in a recession. GDP declined in the first and second quarters of this year. However, the National Bureau of Economic Research, which is the group that actually declares when a recession has occurred, looks to more than just GDP. They want to see a significant decline in economic activity spread across the economy. And that decline should last more than just a few months in order for them to make that call. So in addition to the 2 quarters of GDP contraction, we do have extremely high inflation that reduces real income despite rising nominal wages. We also have an inverted yield curve where short-term interest rates exceed long-term rates. In your inverted yield curves, where the 2-year rate is higher than the 10-year rate, have occurred before 7 of the past 8 recessions. And supply chain issues, although slightly easing, continue to plague both businesses and consumers alike. On the other hand, offsetting the negative indicators, we have high job growth and a very low unemployment rate. The economy produced 528,000 jobs in July, well ahead of the 258,000 expected, and the unemployment rate at 3.5% is tied for the lowest since 1969. This is certainly a switch from those charts that I was showing the council during the start of COVID, when we saw those unbelievable unemployment spikes, and now we are getting back to such a low unemployment rate. In addition, the savings rate has come off the pandemic peak, which means that consumers are spending again, as it is definitely evidenced in our sales tax income. And remember, consumer activity represents about 70% of the economy. So all of that made this year's forecast extremely challenging. And that said, the revenue forecast we're proposing looks towards slower growth in 23 rather than a recession, which is consistent with the State Economic and Revenue Forecast Council's forecast. Although there are certainly signs that the economy may be heading towards a recession, there are still enough conflicting indicators to suggest that a recession may not be a foregone conclusion. And time will tell on that one. Ultimately, we did not want to create a forecast that would unnecessarily force service reductions at this time. However, there are still significant risks that I'll go over on the next slide. So while we're taking an optimistic approach to the general government forecast, we do acknowledge that there are significant risks that may require a course correction if we're wrong and we see a pullback in revenues next year. Forecasts are inherently risky, and this year has been more complex than most. At this point, we see both upside possibilities, where next year could be better than our forecast, as well as downside risks that would cause us to miss the mark. Examples include inflation. If inflation retreats and the Fed is successful as it implements its policy actions such that we do not enter a recession, we should see a boost in consumer and business confidence that will stimulate the economy. On the other hand, if inflation remains high and the Fed is forced to deploy even more aggressive actions, the opposite will likely occur. There are factors that impact our economy that the Fed can't control, like the war in Ukraine and COVID infections. What happens there will impact travel and the supply chain, and all of which would positively or negatively impact the economy depending on which way things go. So that does conclude the information I've prepared on our revenue forecast for this evening. I've included in your packet detail on the general government forecast by main categories, and I also put in a few charts that may be of interest, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you, Susie. I don't have any questions. I read it over earlier today, and it made great sense, and even more now that you've gone over it with us. Dawn or Brenda, do you guys have any, either of you have any questions for Susie at this time?
Yes, I have just a comment and a quick question. Thank you for the forecast. I think they're prudent, and I agree with your methodology. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I did have a question about our reserve accounts and the interest that we gain. You're forecasting an increase in revenue from our interest-bearing accounts?
So are you speaking of so we have a few ways that we invest the money. We have a portfolio of agency bonds, and we are anticipating that the return on the major portfolio will rise as we are reinvesting funds at higher rates as the rates increase. We also keep liquidity money at the state investment pool, and that actually has been increasing much faster than our longer term portfolio because their bonds turn over, they're shorter maturities and they turn over much more quickly. We also have an offsetting earnings rate that reduces our banking fees. And we also anticipate that that will go up as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
This is Brenda. I have a question I'll try to ask. I'm not sure if I'm coming through. I'm still driving. So I'm curious about first of all, you had mentioned that for the 23 forecast, you're anticipating a 1.5% increase in revenue. And it seems like our current year revenue increase is going to be quite a bit higher than that. I thought 1.5% feels like sort of our normal doldrum year revenue increase. Is that where we're going reverting to that forecasting rate?
So the 1.5% is over our revised 22 forecast. So it's off that higher base. It's a much larger increase over our 22 budget.
Okay.
And we are expecting things to level off and slow down a little bit, which again is consistent with what we've seen in other government forecasts, including the states.
Okay. And then I guess I will wait to get the budget to see where we're at in terms of, which of the reserves we're not funding. It's probably the usual customers, but I'm curious, because of this huge budget surplus related to revenue variances for the current year, is there any thought of using those surpluses to help balance next year's budget? I know that's not our normal philosophy, but given where we're at and as we forestall to consider any new revenue sources, is there a way are we thinking differently in any ways that we normally have to balancing our budget?
Well, we have used estimates for current year budget variances to help balance the coming year. We did that during COVID, or the height of COVID, I guess I should say. In this case, it is my understanding that it's unlikely that we will be able to seek a new revenue source for the 24 budget. So we are planning to use any budget variance that we have from this year to help balance 2024.
Yeah,
that will be
this is
year.
Cassie, Brenda, the council president. We're going to have a challenge for the next 2 years, so this year and the following year, before we can consider revenue, I guess, and so we could use that, but then we're going to be in the same spot next year, right? So we're going to have to make some unsustainable choices regardless. And so I guess it's a question of, do we do that now, or do we do it next year, or do we do it both years, depending on where we're at? But we're not going to unfortunately, due to the state of the economy, we're not going to be in a position to consider revenue for a little while still.
Okay, thank you.
So, Susie, I do have a question. Are you going to show the rest of the slides in the packet, or is that just stuff for our background?
Oh, no, we have more slides for you. I just wanted to take a pause after
okay,
I got
good.
through all of that information to give you a chance for questions.
Great, because I had a question on one of them, so I'll wait.
All right. Okay, so I guess we'll move on then to the good news of our lodging tax update. They're definitely providing a bright note on our outlook. They're not part of general government revenue and are restricted for tourism promotion, marketing and operations of special events and festivals designed to attract tourists, and operations and capital support for tourism facilities that are owned and operated by a municipality, public facilities, district, or nonprofit. You can see in the purple columns on this chart. They represent our year-to-date collections, and they are head and shoulders above the orange 2021 and blue 2022 budget columns. This is substantially increasing the amount of revenue that will be available in 2023. And also recall, as a result of our experience with COVID, at that time, it was determined that we would only budget the amount we would believe will be available from the prior year, rather than counting on revenues that are forecast in the coming year to fund projects and events. And so on this slide, you can see our budget plan here. You have in the first column, we have our 2021, or the actuals from 2021, and our estimate for 2022 is in the second to last column. Our LTAC revenue budget for 2022 was $525,000, and as you can see, we are now forecasting that we'll receive $700,000. Receipts have just been exceptional. This means that we anticipate an ending fund balance of $798,000 in 2022. And after fulfilling our commitments to tourism promotion of $150,000 and $100,000 to the PFD for debt support, that leaves $545,000 for investments in projects and events for 2023. And staff will be bringing forward proposals for these funds.
Susie, I have one quick question on this. Can you provide us with what the lodging tax was in 2019? I think that's the real marker to see how far the lodging industry has come back since COVID, because they were pretty much wiped out. But
yes,
if you can just send that later, would be super.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. And next up, we have, I'm sorry, were there any other questions on the LTAC?
Yeah, Susie, are we thinking that this new higher level is kind of the new normal?
Well, we are budgeting for it to be yes.
Okay.
You know, unless we have another bad economic downturn where tourism travel is impacted. Right now, our hotels are doing extremely well.
And I just want to add, you know, we have, as a city, have prioritized just tourism. So we have been, as you've all noticed, that every weekend there's something going on in the downtown core, and so our hotels are full. So whether it's street league skateboarding and bringing all kinds of people from around the world, or you know, the Shack's fresh paint that's moved downtown, or all these events. So almost every weekend during the height of tourism season, we have things going on that are bringing people to the city. And that plan of placemaking is going to continue long into the future. So we hope to see that our hotels are going to maintain these levels of occupancy long from now. So
I think it'll be important for the LTAC committee to think about that extra funding, because I think what's difficult for a lot of those events is to get like a big chunk of money one year, and then next year the grant goes down. And, you know, if we give away $545,000 and those events or new events come along and they're kind of dependent at that level and we're not able to sustain that,
yeah,
that could be difficult. So we may want to allocate some of those funds could be like, you know, sort of one-time startup funds, but recognizing that they're not going to be sustainable, so we don't get, you know, people caught, you know, kind of caught out unawares later. Yeah.
No, I agree. And so staff, you know, we'll work with, you know, Tyler and other staff to put together, and Julio to put together kind of different proposals for how we might recommend we utilize those funds, and kind of with some predictability, maybe some allocation for new startup type of events to help these new organizations start something, but then more predictable funding for events that we want to see year after year after year in our community. And so we'll bring that to you as a board to consider, so that, because we do expect to see some fluctuation there, and we don't want our nonprofits and our art organizations to to suffer from that.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you.
Yes, I agree. I'd like to see some cash carry forward, and maybe an agreement on some sort of basis, some basis that we keep in reserve.
Okay, Susie.
Okay, all right. So next up, we have a few slides on our neighborhood mini grants. At a recent council meeting, I believe it was Council President Stonecipher, thought that it might be a good idea to have a little discussion at Budget Committee about mini grants. And I do have a couple of slides after this with some additional data. And Nicole Weber is also here to talk about plans for engagement. So this slide, starting out, shows population by neighborhood, and it's in order of magnitude. And at this point, I think I would like to turn it over to Nicole.
Thank you, Susie. Thanks for having me, everyone. So I'll be pretty quick. I would just have 3 slides and then open it up for questions, or if you have questions throughout, please feel free to just jump in. So slide 1, just like Susie explained, covers the population of each neighborhood. So currently, Westmont Holly operate as one, with one neighborhood chair there. So those populations are shown together. We do have a few other neighborhoods that have combined in the past, but are not active at this moment. So we didn't add them together here. And then on the right, you can see the geographical outline that also highlights the population for your viewing pleasure. The next slide gives a history of money spent by neighborhood going back to 2012. The average of all these years is about $1,800, and that includes 2021 and 2022 for COVID. And then this year, 2020 and 2019 for COVID, and then 2021 and 2020 is correct. And then for 2022, we've gone down to the $1,000 mini grant amount. So you'll notice that there are some variations throughout the year. A good example of that is in 2019, you'll notice that Riverside spent about $3,000, and this was for a park improvement project. And so they went through a special application process, which we helped them do. And then we were able to coordinate the use of 2018 and 2019 funds so that they were able to complete that project and not exceed their mini grant allocations for that year and then the next. And there's a few of those throughout that are similar stories where they completed a separate application and worked with city staff to get something done that might have been just like a higher value, maybe in neighborhood signs or things like that. Judy?
Yeah, you said that for this year there's $1,000 allocation. Is that for each neighborhood, and what's the total for the year for this year?
So we have $19,000 allocated for each because we have 19 neighborhoods.
Okay.
But we only have about 12 active neighborhoods.
Uh-huh.
So 17. So 12,000 of that is allocated.
So you don't want to divide the balance up with the ones that are active?
I can say I don't think that most of our neighborhoods have capacity right now to spend more than $1,000. The events, and I can't speak for them.
If they did, could they come back and say, hey, we have this project that would enhance the park or something?
They could. We could talk through it. There's nothing stopping people from requesting more money, but we do have some neighborhoods that have capacity to host a lot of things, and some neighborhoods that are really struggling with engagement and a lot of fatigue from our volunteers, I think, across the city. And that would include, our board and commission members, and even our youth advisory board is feeling fatigued at this moment. And so we're really trying to think of new ways to help our neighborhoods re-engage with the community. And I'll go through that on my
Okay.
next slide. But I definitely hear that, and I actually would like to. I'm proposing a different use of that money because I think our neighborhoods really need help coming into what engagement looks like now. And there are other groups across the city that are also struggling with engaging their communities. So, some future goals that I'd like to allocate those leftover monies for that you were just talking about, Councilmember Tui, would be to broaden the eligibility for mini grants to community organizations that expand beyond traditional neighborhoods. We have a lot of groups in the city of Everett that are scattered, but come together to build community from common interests. And that might be a great example of that is I believe I used before is the Marshallese community that we have in Everett. They might not all live in one neighborhood, but coming together and building community is very important for them. And a lot of those people might not feel comfortable participating in a traditional neighborhood structure. I would like to focus on community building that brings together a diverse populations and communities of interest that reach across neighborhood boundaries. Encourage events that share culture and promote engagement in underserved areas in Everett. So a good example of that would be South Everett. And then allocate unspent mini grant funds to support the modernization of community building. And an example of that could be I'm trying to create a plan in partnership with our library right now for webcams that our neighborhood leaders could check out and be able to host hybrid meetings because those webcams are expensive and you need good ones. It's hard to just put up your laptop and have a conversation with people when there's 4 people in person and 8 people online. That it's really hard to facilitate. And I'd also like to come up with some trainings that would help people facilitate hybrid engagement activities. And so that is what I'm hoping to spend the additional money on is to help rebuilding our neighborhoods, rebuilding our volunteers, and creating a structure that people are able to come into that would allow them to engage in what we're seeing today, which is hybrid. Everything needs to be hybrid. And, a lot of our newer parents and things like that want to engage but can't because maybe they have kids at home and don't have childcare. And some of our community still isn't comfortable being in person because they're concerned for their health. And we want to respect that as well and still give them avenues to connect with their neighbors and still feel welcomed and loved in the city of Everett, which they of course are. So that is my presentation, and any questions or anything that you might have to add, Susie or Mayor Franklin, please feel free to do that now.
I just want to thank you, Nicole. I think Nicole has been really long before her promotion as our engagement director. She's been really focused on how do we engage different sectors of Everett. She's been working with the neighborhoods for a long time, but she's also working with all of these other organizations that don't fit neatly into a neighborhood box, but that are really trying to engage and activate their community in our community. And we desperately want to hear and support those voices too. So I think this is a kind of a creative strategy of how do we continue to support our neighborhood groups and help them be successful in engaging their neighborhoods, but also helping our community engage with government in a way that they haven't been comfortable with in the past. So I really like the different avenues that you've set forward. So I just appreciate it. Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you. And we'll also be bringing our diversity board. They're already in this conversation of how we're going to look at this money, and they're going to help us set some priorities and really help us define what community is, because I don't want to, give, I'll use Bank of America as an example because I can see them. We don't want to give Bank of America maybe funds to do a block party downtown, but how do we put parameters around that? How do we define that? Is something that we're working on, but I can make a clear example between our Marshallese community and like a huge organization. And those two are not the same. So it really needs to be a grassroots effort. And I haven't figured out how to quite put that in writing yet, but I'm working on that with our diversity board, and they're going to come back with some ideas, and they're out doing some research to try to help us really narrow that scope so that we're not missing the mark.
Yeah, that would be great to have a presented to the council when you get that criteria and the process. That'd be great.
Of course.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Works good.
Yeah, Nicole, this is Brenda. I like this too. I agree with, I'm glad to hear that you're trying to think about how you're going to define this. I could see even a lot of the organizations that are putting on arts events and, getting funding from other sources at the city already, thinking, that this would be nice to tap into even additional funds. So we'll have to think really carefully about how we make sure that those are different funding sources.
Absolutely. And I think one more kind of just small piece on this is our inactive neighborhoods. We recently had a chair of one of our neighborhoods decide that she was at capacity and needed to step away. And I want to be able to, if she wanted to throw hypothetically like a national night out event in 2023, I want to create space for her to be able to do that, or for somebody in that neighborhood to be able to do that, and create that community building, because National Night Out is so important, and it's one of our larger national night out usually. So I want people to be able to apply to say, hey, I want to do this for my community. I think it's really important to build these relationships, and I'd like to take on this thing, but I can't necessarily chair a neighborhood event or a neighborhood meeting every month. And so I think people need that flexibility, especially now, and I really want to be able to give it to them.
Other questions for Nicole? Awesome. Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And that concludes the material we've put together for this evening. Unless there are any other questions about the forecast or the other.
I did have a question on the numbers that you also sent in the packet, Susie. Mm-hmm. My question was on the gas tax that we've received, and it looked lower than normal. And I'm just curious if it was just timing. I can't remember what page it's on because I didn't print it, but there was the revenue that we get from gas tax. And I was just curious if it was just timing that it wasn't. I expected it to be higher because of prices.
Yes. So you're talking about gasoline as opposed to natural gas. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, our gas tax revenues have been down. Gas tax is distributed to us by the state, so it's not where we're getting tax from our gas stations that comes to us.
Right.
We just get an allocation based on a state formula, and the gas tax has been down all year. Despite the high prices.
Yeah, that was interesting. Okay. That was my only other question, but anything from Dawn or Brenda for Susie or Nicole?
Nothing for me.
We're going to get a break before council.
Thanks for sharing, Judy.
All right. Thank you. And Nicole, thank you for your presentation. I look forward to hearing more. And Susie, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you
All
very
right.
much.
Have a wonderful
See you in
night.
a little bit. Okay. Bye-bye.